Martin Rees is here. He is the professor of astronomy and cosmology, also the master of Trinity College at the University of Cambridge. He holds the honorary title of Astronomer Royal for the United Kingdom. Over the past 40 years, his work has been at the forefront of cosmology. His latest book is called Our Final Hour. It details the wide-ranging threats that face mankind in the 21st century. I am very pleased to have Martin Rees at this table for the very first time. Welcome. Just lay it out for me. I mean, I could put this together in a dramatic way. You're worried about what?
My worry is that in this coming century, science is going to advance faster than ever before and on a broader front. And this will lead to the problems that individuals will have greater power for good or for ill. And also, I think there will be changes in more dimensions than ever before. Over the whole of human history, the one thing that hasn't changed has been human nature and human character. But this century, with targeted drugs, implants into the brain and genetic modification, even human nature may change. And so for all these reasons, I think this coming century is going to be the most hazardous of all, because we have all these technologies and this sort of asymmetry in the sense that an individual will be empowered to a far greater extent than individuals were in the past.
You even argue that if you look at the previous century, and certainly the second half of the previous century, or certainly the last 40 years, we were lucky that we didn't do ourselves in.
Well, we were.
Lucky may not be the right word,
yes.
but...
Yes, and one of the punchlines of my book is the view that there's a 50% chance that in this coming century there will be some catastrophe for civilization, at least as bad as a nuclear war. And to put that in perspective, I certainly think if one reads about the history of the Cuba crisis, etc., that there was a 20 or 30% chance of a catastrophe at that time. And of course that threat has faded somewhat. There may be some chance of one nuclear weapon going on in the Middle East, but there's no chance now of 10,000 going on, but those weapons still lie around. And if you look 100 years ahead, then of course there can be some political realignment which could lead to a new standoff as dangerous as a Cold War. And so even if we just consider nuclear weapons, which will spread and can't be disinvented, I think they're going to be a threat hanging over the world for the next century and give a substantial risk of a catastrophe. But added to those will be the risks stemming from new kinds of technology, which are hard to predict, of course. We can't predict even 10 years ahead, but they may be even more threatening and even harder to control. So terror or error and the misuse of new technology makes the world more dangerous in future.
And in fact, you seem to suggest that bioterrorism is in your eyes, the biggest threat.
Well, in the short term, that's not going to destroy us all, but it's a new threat. And what I do worry about is that there's a threat not just from terrorist groups, but from the lone weirdo, the individual empowered
with
by
one
technology.
Or something.
Yeah, I mean, I quote reports from the National Academy of Sciences which indicate how someone with knowledge of biotech and genetic modification could, of course, do something more serious than was done by the rather ineffective efforts at bioterror in the past. And in the short run, I would be very concerned, particularly if I was an American, that if there were one incident when someone maliciously released some pathogen with the intention of causing an epidemic, then even if they did not succeed, there'd be a tremendous backlash against science, there'd be pressure for intrusive surveillance, because otherwise we could not be sure the same thing wouldn't happen again somewhere, sometime. So in the short run, I think there's a real threat, particularly in this country, from a single instance of misuse of biotech, which would have a very severe effect on public attitudes. We know, of course, what happened after the anthrax scare, and we know how the media can amplify any crisis. We know also how we are very interconnected, and single-point failure can be more serious. And all these things make us more vulnerable than we ever were before.
Okay, most of us understand and appreciate the dangers of weapons of mass destruction. And that danger is always there, and that we have not one but 5 or 6 countries that we know of who have weapons of mass destruction, and we don't know what may or may not be happening to those weapons in the former Soviet Union, but we think that they've been accounted for. It seems to me, though, that you are not just saying these threats are out there. You almost are suggesting that it is likely that it's going to happen.
Well, I think there's a significant chance of worse cases of terrorism or worse cases of misuse of new technology by individuals. But if we look 50 or 100 years ahead, then obviously there'll be a political realignment. We can't assume that we will have the single American superpower dominating 50 years from now. There could be a standoff just as it was in the Cold War period. And if it's handled less well than the Cuba crisis was, then we are under that threat of a nuclear war.
So what must we do as a civilization to stop it?
Well, one of the criticisms I've had from people who've read my book is that I raise these concerns but don't come up with good answers.
You now understand why I asked the question.
Indeed, and I don't claim to have any answers, but I believe in general that it's important to be mindful of these concerns. And I write my book as a scientist, and the book is in fact the outgrowth of talks I've given to students and other groups who are concerned with science and how it's going. And I do think that scientists do have a particular responsibility to raise these issues. Scientists obviously can't control the way their work is used, nor should they, because decisions on the application of science should be made by a wider public concerned with the ethics,
Well, you also don't
etc.
believe you can shut down science.
No, I don't. In fact, I quote in my book Bill Joy, who
Been
achieved...
at this table 10 times.
Right. He achieved notoriety with his suggestion that science should be stopped.
Right.
I think his concerns are mainly futuristic science fiction.
Oh, and so all of his worries about nanotechnology and robotics and all of that,
well,
and
I
replication...
think 50 years ago they may be serious worries, but at the moment...
50 years ago, 50 years
so
from
50
now.
years from now they may be more serious worries, but at the moment I don't think they are serious. But I think the fallacy in what Bill Joy is saying is that he believes that by going slow we can selectively eliminate the risks but still keep the benefits of science.
And you don't think?
I don't think we can, because when a scientist makes a discovery, the scientist has no idea how that discovery will be applied.
The fact that you are an astronomer, how does this inform your writing about something called Our Final Hour?
Yes. Well, not directly, except I think in one respect, and that is that astronomers have an awareness not only of the immense time spans in the past, which have led to our evolution.
Right.
That's part of common culture now. But they have an awareness of the long time spans that lie ahead. And astronomers are perhaps unusual in recognizing that we humans are not the culmination of evolution. The time lying ahead is at least as long as the time that has elapsed from the beginning of the evolution of life to the present. And so this makes one have an extra concern about what we do on this planet this century, because it will, if we handle it badly, not only be bad news for us and our immediate descendants, but it could foreclose future developments that could extend for millennia, even millions of years in the future. So I think the fact that I'm an astronomer does perhaps give me a sort of global perspective, but also gives me this perspective that we are custodians and stewards for a very long-term future.
When was the beginning of life?
Well, about 3.5 billion years ago, the very first life, we believe, and so we are the outcome of that kind of evolution, and there's no reason to think we're the culmination. Indeed, the evolution in the future is likely to be far faster than it has in the past, because the human species will evolve not through natural selection, but through
genetic
directed
engineering, all
modification
the
of
other
all
things we
kinds.
talked about, right? All kinds of modification.
Within a few centuries, if it was allowed, there could be a divergence of species. Lee Silver and other people have written about this, that there could be a divergence among humanity between the privileged and the underprivileged in a few centuries or less. And also, if we imagine that 100 years from now there are small communities living away from Earth out in space, then of course they may start to diverge. So the evolution in the future
Okay, but the first divergence will be between those privileged and those not privileged.
Well, that's what Lee Silver and others have argued, and this is another reason in which the capacity for change is far greater this century than before, because human capacities are themselves going to be subject to control in a way they weren't in the past.
The inevitable question to ask you in this context also is what is your own ideas about, sort of the common phrase being intelligent life in other places?
I think it's a fascinating question. I'm in favour of efforts to search for signals.
To listen and listen and listen.
But I won't hold my breath.
Yeah.
But I think it
Somebody told me that we're not sending signals out as much as we're listening. Is that true?
Well, not directed signals, but of course...
Because we might be scared what they might do if they misread it, was what I was...
Well, they're nowhere here,
misheard
because all the radio and TV signals, even this programme, but more importantly, all the radar signals have been going out for 100 years. So any aliens watching the Earth will have noticed for the last 100 years that it's become an intense source of radio emission of an unnatural kind. So they would know we're here. We can't hide. But I think, as regards whether there is life out there, it's a fascinating question, and there are two parts to it. First, is simple life widespread in the universe? We don't know the answer to that.
What do you think?
I would guess that it probably is, but even that we don't know.
And it would need what to be simple life? What would it need? Need water?
Well, that's a necessary condition, but we don't know what the sufficient conditions are. That's why it's important to look on Mars or on Jupiter's moons to find evidence of simple life. But no one believes there's any advanced life in our solar system apart from on the Earth. But even if simple life is widespread, then it may not be automatic that it evolves towards complex life. Biologists debate whether if you reran evolution on Earth, you get back to humans, or whether you'd end up with just ants or something like that. And so we don't know how likely it is that intelligent life
biologists
develops.
debate what? Now, if you reversed it, evolution?
If you reran evolution.
Right. Reran means...
Well, started the clock again.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Say 1 billion years ago.
Right. We might not end up at the same place.
We might not.
Because of simply random
Because
whatever.
it may be the result of all kinds of contingencies, ice ages, asteroid impacts, and things like that. Right. And so even on Earth, we don't know whether it was inevitable that simple life evolved the way it did. Still less, therefore, can we say whether it's likely that life evolved elsewhere.
Now, what is the likelihood, do you think, that you would go so far as to think it's somehow intelligent life like us, rather than simple life?
I think it's unlikely.
I haven't made that giant leap that this is intelligent life.
Right, yes. I think it's unlikely. But essentially I think it's such a difficult and uncertain question that we should be entirely agnostic. It's worth looking. We've no idea whether it's likely or whether it's unlikely, but we should be open-minded. But it does, I think, affect the way we look at human beings and at the Earth, because if the Earth was indeed a unique place where life had evolved to the stage of being intelligent, then it would mean that what happens here on Earth is not merely of terrestrial importance, but could almost be deemed of cosmic importance. Because if life's only got to an advanced stage here, then what happens here on Earth may determine whether life from Earth spreads in the far future beyond the Earth through the galaxy, and life becomes an important part of the cosmos, or on the other hand, whether it's snuffed out and the universe never becomes pervaded by life. So if life is unique to the Earth now, which it may be, then our stewardship of the Earth is of cosmic importance even.
How many universes are there?
How many universes? Well, that's a very speculative question.
It's a loaded question.
Our own universe contains billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars in them. And they're, of course, all possible abodes for life. Every star.
But some people sometimes speculate that there's another universe.
Oh, indeed. There could be other universes beyond what our telescope can see. There could be other universes separated from us in some fourth spatial dimension. There could be a universe a millimetre away from us, which we can't see because that millimetre is measured in some extra spatial dimension, and we're imprisoned in our 3 dimensions. So there are all kinds of ways in which our cosmos could be far more wonderful than we can envisage.
Which brings me to the question I asked you before we started, which is, I said, what's the most important question science has to ask? And you said?
Well, I said it's really what are the limits of science and what are the limits of our human brain.
Right.
Because I said earlier that I don't think humans are the culmination of evolution. There will be more intelligent creatures perhaps in the far future. And it's by no means obvious that the important scientific questions are all, as it were, matched to the capacity of human brains. And so what we can understand in our human science may be only a tiny fraction of what there is to be understood. And I think the key question is how much of the bedrock nature of reality is within the capacity of human brains.
As you know, as you hear all the time, there are hundreds of thousands of people watching this show saying to me right now, ask him about religion, ask him about religion.
Well, I believe in peaceful coexistence between science and religion. Obviously, you can't be an astronomer and be a creationist, but you can certainly be an adherent of almost all religions and be a scientist. And I have colleagues who are adherents of most religions. I'm slightly sceptical about whether there could be much of a constructive dialogue between science and religion, as some people claim, but certainly there can be peaceful coexistence. There's no reason at all why science should be perceived as hostile to religion.
There's so much to talk about, but this is the New York Times, which gave me a lot of.
This is a special anniversary issue. Yes.
Yeah. Does science matter? All right. And it's, the first issue of Science Times appeared 25 years ago, November 14th, 1978. The first issue in the New York Times. Its guiding principle ever since has been that science is not a collection of answers, but a way of asking questions. An enterprise driven by curiosity. That's almost a definition of this show. To celebrate the anniversary, we pose 25 of the most provocative questions facing science on pages 1 through 16. As always, answers are provisional. I'm going to ask you these questions. All right, just give me your best.
Well, don't expect answers.
I don't expect. It's not unfair because there's no consequences. But will humans ever visit Mars?
I think they will. I think probably within 50 years. But I think the first humans to go to Mars will be those who go not in the style of NASA astronauts, but they will go in the style of independent explorers. I think the trouble with the NASA program is it's done by taxpayers' money. It has to be done with minimum risks. And I think we have to accept that going to Mars is going to be very risky. Many people may go with one-way tickets that may never come back. And so I think it'll only be feasible to send people to Mars when it can be done funded by private consortia, by people prepared to take high risks. In fact, to be more specific, my model for the kind of person who will be an explorer to Mars is someone like Steve Fossett, the round-the-world balloonist.
Oh, exactly, that's a good idea. Interesting.
He was a guy who was intrepid, took great risks, and if he came to a sad end, we'd mourn a brave and resourceful man, but it wouldn't be a national trauma like when the shuttle crashes. And I think that the only feasible way in which men and women will go to Mars will be if they can go in that spirit. And this will require, of course, costs to come down and corners to be cut, risks to be accepted. And so I think the NASA-type proposal to go to Mars is going to be very expensive, and NASA is enforced to be rather risk-averse.
I think you have, to read you, mixed emotions about manned space travel.
I do. I mean, to put it in one sentence, as a scientist or practical man, I'm against it, but as a human being, I'm in favour. What I mean by that is that the practical case for sending people into space is getting weaker all the time with every advance in robotics and miniaturization. On the other hand, I do believe that there is an exciting dimension to sending humans into space and exploring, and I believe in the very long run that life has a future beyond the Earth. And if we look ahead thousands or even millions of years, then one would like to feel that humans, or maybe by then post-humans, will be living far beyond the Earth. And so I hope there is a long-range future, but I think it'll start off with risk-taking pioneers going to Mars and accepting that they may never come back.
I'm going to repeat some of these, and just for the benefit of you, because this is a subject not ask you to answer them. The second was, how does the brain work? We'll skip that. What is gravity really? We'll skip that. Will we ever find Atlantis?
I don't think so, no.
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 Because?
Well, I think that was a myth, and we know enough about what's under the Atlantic to know there was nothing there.
What are our replaceable parts? I mean, again,
well, of course,
almost everything, I think.
Almost everything, and of course the most interesting question is whether we can have implants into our brain to enhance our capacities.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Some people say within 50 years we'll have that, so that's another way in which humans can change.
And then the answer to the great question is, what are the limits of man's capacity to think would be changed?
Well, they would, and of course the other question people raise, people like Ray Kurzweil, is that the machines will take over.
Exactly.
He and Bill Joy are worried that the machines will take over, and indeed you could say that the last invention humans need ever make is a machine of our intellectual capacities, because then that machine
will take over
and can make its own still better machines.
In the replication.
That's right, so that's what Ray Kurzweil and people say, but that's still science fiction.
All right. When is the next ice age?
Well, of course, the immediate worry is warming rather
Exactly,
than cooling.
I know.
But in a few thousand years, there will be an ice age, I suspect. But we've got to get through this century.
Yeah. Here's one you can deal with. What came before the Big Bang?
I can't deal with that because that's
Where it
one
all
of the
started.
challenges. But that is closer to my professional interest.
That's exactly why I said
I
it.
think that it's amazing that we can actually talk with a straight face about the universe back to the time when it was a millisecond old. We can say that because we understand the physics, we have actual fossils that date from that period. But going right back to the very beginning, we can't be confident, and the reason for that is that right back at the beginning the conditions were so extreme that we don't understand the relevant science. We need some new breakthroughs to understand what's going on. So one of the challenges of 21st century science is going to be to understand the physics that allows us to unify Einstein's theory with the micro world, and then perhaps we'll understand whether our Big Bang is one of many, and perhaps whether we can understand what happened beforehand. I suspect we'll actually find that we have to think about space and time in a more complicated way. You know, we use the idea of 3 dimensions, forwards and backwards, left and right, up and down, and time just ticking away. But there may be extra dimensions to think about which are crucial in understanding the Big Bang.
Choose to play any of these you want to or not. Can we live? Could we live forever?
Well, of course, some people say that perhaps our brains can be downloaded in some way, but I doubt that our sort of material fabric can last that long.
What is the next
Do we want
plague?
to anyway?
Yeah. No, I've skipped one. Here's a big one. Are men necessary?
Well, they may not be for reproduction, but let's hope they're not superfluous.
Yeah, and then the next question is women. What is the next plague? Is that
The next plague?
plague, like the Black Plague?
Well, of course, this is a serious issue about whether it'll be something genetically modified from an existing plague or not. And the other issue, which touches base with some of the issues in my book, is whether we need to be concerned about such plagues.
Yeah. Your book is a series of sort of chapters.
That's right, yes.
I mean that more than it sounds like.
Yep.
It's a series of things that have come, you brought them together to form the context of a consideration of whether it is our final hour.
Yes, Our Final Century. I should say that the British title of my book was Our Final
I
Century.
know it.
with a question mark.
Your publisher, did you object to your publisher changing this?
I was slightly unhappy, but I understood that in America you like instant gratification
Well,
and maybe
let's
instant
not go too far
disgratification.
there.
But anyway, it's about problems of this century.
Okay. Can robots become conscious? Well, that's something you've already spoken to. And if they do, then we're in trouble as humans.
Well, it's an interesting philosophical question. They can perhaps attain human capabilities, but some philosophers would say that you can have a zombie which is as intelligent as a human but still not conscious.
Yeah.
So people like John Searle would say that a robot can never be conscious, even if it has human capabilities.
I've had people come in, and when I say to them, what's the most important question, they say, understanding of consciousness.
I would say so, and that may be one of these that is beyond human brains, because maybe there's some intrinsic limitation of a brain understanding itself.
We're moving along here. Why do we sleep? I mean, I assume we sleep because we need, our cells need regeneration
or something. Yes, we don't know.
Okay. How smart are animals?
Well, again, we don't know. Smarter than people used to think 50 years ago, certainly.
Yeah.
Amazing memories in some birds.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, give me an example.
Well,
you remember what flight
birds
pattern,
can remember
what flight patterns they came on and all that?
Yes, and when they bury food items, they can remember hundreds of locations. And also, animals can recognize faces of other animals and discriminate them. I mean, a sheep can discriminate 50 different sheep's faces.
Can science prove there's a God?
No, I don't think so.
And is evolution truly random?
I believe it is. I suppose that's related to the question of so-called intelligent design, which is a new cult in this country. I think evolution, which is random, seems to be able to explain everything we can see. But I think the main point about all these questions is they indicate how open-ended science is. It's misleading to think of science as being something which is working itself out and is nearly finished. As science advances, the frontier gets longer, more and more new questions swim into focus. And so there are more new challenges. And the big challenge of science is threefold, really. It's to understand the very big, which astronomers do, the very small, which physicists do, but the very complex, the everyday world. And that's the biggest challenge of all, I think.
Okay, now I think you've just answered the question I was going to conclude with, which is, what is the responsibility of scientists? Which is to answer those questions.
Well, more than that, it's to answer those questions, to contribute to public understanding and culture, but also to be mindful of the application of their work. And if their work has benign applications, they should promote those. If it has harmful applications, they should not promote them. And I think it's wrong for scientists to believe they can shrug off responsibility. It's rather like parents and their teenage kids. You may not be able to control your teenage kids, but you're poor parents if you don't care about what happens to them. And in the same way, scientists create their ideas, and they have a responsibility to ensure that their ideas bear fruit and don't lead to the kind of disasters which I discuss in my book.
This book is called Our Final Hour. As much as anyone I know, you can make science exciting, and
Well, I'm lucky that my science is one that excites public enthusiasm and isn't perceived as threatening, and so I think.
But you're saying that science should be perceived as threatening because.
Well, some is.
That's
my
why we
particular
have a book
science is
called
less
The Final
threatening,
Hour,
yeah.
or The Final
Right.
Century.
Yep.
Because science can, and
Indeed it can be, yes.
and the aberrant behavior of individuals.
Well, I think as people are more empowered by science, then the aberrant behavior of a few individuals may be harder to cope with.
All right.
That's another
Martin
message.
Rees, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you
Thank
here.
you.